Welcome, weary traveler of the night. Rest your thoughts, slow your breath, and drift with me through the corridors of forgotten time. Tonight, you will hear why the giants of old, the Nephilim, turned on their own blood and devoured their own kind in a war that shook both earth and heaven. Before the flood, when the breath of God still lingered over the earth like a gentle veil, there was peace, a strange, shimmering peace that seemed almost unnatural. Rivers sang through unbroken valleys, and the air glowed with the song of creation. Yet even within that perfection, something restless stirred, faint and patient, like thunder forming beyond the horizon. For in every paradise there sleeps the whisper of its own undoing. If your spirit hungers for the stories the stars once told, remain still, let your heart listen. For what comes next is not mere myth but memory, the tale of the mighty ones who rose from heaven's flame and fell by their own hand. They were called the Nephilim, the mighty ones of old, the children of heaven and earth. Born of the Watchers who abandoned their appointed thrones to mingle with mortal women, they walked the world as living contradictions, part divine, part dust. To humankind they were gods. Their hands shaped mountains, their voices commanded kings, and their eyes held the light of the stars they once called home. But to heaven they were a wound, a scar carved into creation's harmony. At first they stood united, brothers of celestial blood, radiant in purpose. Yet the same light that crowned them began to fracture beneath the weight of pride. What had been one family became many. Clans rose, each claiming greater glory, each hungering for dominion over the others. The earth grew quiet beneath their swelling pride. The mountains watched in silence, the stars dimmed their song. Somewhere beyond mortal hearing, a question began to echo, a question that would haunt all ages to come. What could drive heaven's sons to slaughter their own blood? The first embers of that answer glowed unseen beneath their shining cities, as envy moved like smoke under a door and brother began to look upon brother not as kin, but as a rival. In the beginning, when the stars still sang their first songs, there were beings set apart, sentinels of the Most High, appointed to watch, to guard, to guide. They were called the Watchers, radiant among the celestial host, standing upon the thresholds between eternity and the mortal realm. They were the eyes of heaven upon the earth, the silent stewards of divine order. From mountain peaks invisible to men, they beheld the rise of humankind, the dust-born image-bearers, fragile yet wondrous, whose hearts reflected something the angels themselves could scarcely understand, the mystery of free will. For ages uncounted, the Watchers observed in obedience. They taught men the seasons, the patterns of the heavens, and the tending of the earth. Their task was to nurture creation's harmony without ever partaking in it. They could touch the winds but not the soil. They could speak to prophets but never to lovers. For the law of heaven forbade the mingling of spirit and flesh. The realm of man was a sacred boundary, a veil not to be crossed. But in time, what begins as wonder can turn to longing. The Watchers saw the daughters of men, their laughter in the fields, their songs by the rivers, and admiration gave way to desire. They looked upon humanity not as distant guardians but as hearts drawn toward a flame. And in that moment, eternity trembled, for the eyes that once beheld the glory of God now gazed upon the beauty of flesh. Genesis whispers the words like an echo from a world before memory. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took of them wives, whomever they chose. It was a choice that shattered heaven's order. The Watchers who should have remained above descended in defiance of the decree. Their descent was unlike any fall before it, majestic, mournful, and irreversible. From the heights of the firmament they passed through the veil of creation, their light dimming with every breath of mortal air. Mountains shook as they touched the earth. The stars themselves seemed to flicker in mourning, for something holy had crossed into corruption. Upon the plains of the ancient world, men beheld these beings and trembled. To mortal eyes, they appeared as gods, tall as cedars, radiant as the dawn. Their voices carried the weight of the heavens. Their gaze burned with otherworldly fire. The daughters of men welcomed them with awe, not yet knowing that this union would stain the very soil beneath their feet. From that forbidden joining came a generation unlike any before, the Nephilim, children of heaven's brilliance and earth's frailty. Their birth was both miracle and curse. They inherited the might of angels and the passions of men, strength unmeasured and appetites unrestrained. The ancient texts call them the mighty ones, men of renown, but beneath that renown pulsed the sorrow of their origin. In the beginning, the Nephilim knew unity. They stood together as brothers, their power unmatched, their understanding vast. They built cities where none had stood, shaped rivers and carved monuments that defied erosion. Their minds carried the secrets of the stars, the patterns of creation itself. And for a time, their father watchers rejoiced, believing that perhaps beauty could still be born from disobedience. But heaven's silence was not approval, it was grief. The law had been broken and creation began to twist under the strain. The more the Nephilim grew in number and in pride, the further the world drifted from its original harmony. For every act of might there was a shadow of arrogance, for every song of triumph an echo of rebellion. The light within them began to fracture, just as it had in their fathers. The watchers watched still, but now as prisoners of their own choice. Their immortal sight, once filled with joy, became burdened by the weight of mortality. They saw their sons hunger for dominion, their daughters wield forbidden arts. They saw mankind worship their offspring as deities. The very beings sent to protect humanity had instead raised up idols against heaven. In the nights of that age, the stars bore witness to sorrow. The sky seemed closer then, as though creation itself leaned in, holding its breath. The watchers stood among men but no longer belonged to either realm. They had traded the eternal for the temporal, the divine for desire. And in doing so, they tore the fabric between heaven and earth. The descent of the watchers was not merely a fall. It was the first crack in cosmic law, the first note of dissonance in the symphony of creation. What began as longing ended as fracture. The offspring of that union, magnificent and terrible, would carry within them the memory of heaven and the madness of flesh. Their cities glowed beneath the stars, radiant with stolen knowledge. Yet beneath that glow, the ground itself began to tremble. For corruption, once sown, always bears fruit. And from their glory would soon arise envy, pride, and bloodshed, the first civil war among the sons of the divine. The heavens still remember their descent. It was the day the watchers became the watched, when light first learned the weight of shadow. Their creation sets the stage for corruption, where divine purpose meets forbidden pride, and the radiant sons of heaven begin their slow descent into darkness. The sons of the watchers grew, and their shadows lengthened across the face of the world. The dawn of the Nephilim kingdoms came like the rising of a second sun, brilliant, terrible, and unstoppable. From the highlands where the mountains kissed the clouds to the coasts where rivers met the sea, their voices commanded and their hands shaped the earth. The world of men looked upward and saw in them gods, radiant and dreadful. They built cities of impossible scale, stone upon stone rising as though gravity itself bowed to their will. Monoliths pierced the heavens, temples crowned with fire reflected the stars, and vast causeways stretched for leagues across the plains. Their craftsmen, taught by their angelic fathers, wove metals unknown to mortals, bronze that shimmered like sunlight, glass that caught the wind. Their wisdom brought wonders that defied comprehension, irrigation from mountain snows, celestial calendars carved into stone, the art of writing the stars upon clay. To the eyes of humankind, the Nephilim were creators, the keepers of divine secrets. but what was divine in them had already begun to decay. For every act of brilliance, there was an echo of corruption. Their altars rose not to the Most High, but to their own names. Songs once written in praise of the Creator now exalted the deeds of the mighty. Humanity knelt at their feet, offering gold, grain, and worship to those they believed could command heaven's favor. The Nephilim accepted it gladly, draped in robes of light and blood, their thrones carved upon mountainsides. In every land, stories were born, tales that would one day echo through civilizations yet unborn. The Greeks would call them titans, the Sumerians, the gods of Anunnaki, and others would whisper of shining beings who came from the stars. Their memory would survive the floodwaters of time, reshaped by tongues and myths, yet always pointing back to this age, the reign of the hybrid kings. Under their rule, peace was enforced by fear, prosperity balanced upon cruelty. Cities flourished, but hearts darkened. Knowledge expanded, but mercy withered. And even among the Nephilim, unity faltered. Each clan began to see itself as the rightful heir of heaven's legacy. The sons of Semjaza claimed dominion over the eastern mountains. The children of Azazel ruled the forges of the southern plains. And far to the west, those of Sariel built citadels that reached the clouds. Their borders hardened, and the air grew tense with unspoken rivalry. It began not with blood, but with boasting. Festivals once meant for unity became contests of supremacy, whose towers reached higher, whose armies marched farther, whose wisdom shone brighter. Pride, that ancient root of ruin, began to sprout among them. They had inherited not only the power of their fathers, but also their restlessness. The same defiance that led the watchers down from the heavens now stirred within their sons. Yet for all their pride, there was beauty that even heaven mourned. Their music echoed across valleys like silver fire. Their architecture caught the light in ways that made the earth seem newly born. When they walked, the ground itself trembled, not with fear, but with recognition of power unfit for dust. Humanity gazed upon them in awe and terror, unable to discern holiness from blasphemy. The Nephilim had become both saviors and tyrants, beloved and despised. At night, their cities glowed with sacred flame. Priests in golden robes performed rituals beneath constellations, calling upon names that had no place in creation. Some invoked the memory of their angelic fathers, seeking to reach them beyond the veil. Others called upon darker forces that whispered from the deep. Sacrifices were made, not in thanksgiving, but in appeasement. The world was still young, yet the stench of corruption already reached heaven's courts. The watchers who remained in exile wept as they watched from afar. What they had hoped would bring light to mankind had become a mirror of their own rebellion. The Nephilim no longer looked upward for guidance. They looked inward into the abyss of their own grandeur. Their strength became their curse, their glory their doom. Beneath the golden glow of their empires, something unseen began to fracture. Brothers, once united in divine heritage, now measured their worth by conquest. Their hearts, immortal but tainted, beat with a growing hunger, a thirst for dominion that no city, no throne could satisfy. The people they ruled began to suffer in silence. Human kings served as vassals beneath their towering shadows. Temples demanded tribute, and blood became the currency of power. The peace that had once blanketed the pre-flood world gave way to unease, a tremor of things to come. The earth groaned beneath the weight of their pride, and heaven's patience thinned. The rise of the Nephilim kingdoms was as dazzling as it was doomed. What they built was a masterpiece of forbidden union, the perfection of creation twisted by the rebellion of angels. Yet even in their splendor, the first cracks of jealousy began to gleam like hairline fractures in marble. The same pride that raised their temples would soon turn them into tombs. Above their cities, the sky still shimmered with false serenity, but the angels knew the truth: peace was ending. The Nephilim stood upon the pinnacle of their greatness, unaware that the higher they climbed, the farther they would fall. Their rise cannot last, for pride births jealousy, and jealousy births war, and soon the mighty sons of heaven will turn their strength upon each other. There came a time when the light that once bound the sons of the Watchers together began to dim. What began as a whisper of rivalry became a roaring storm of envy. The Nephilim, once united in glory, turned inward. Kingdom looked upon kingdom, bloodline upon bloodline, and saw not brotherhood but threat. The same pride that drove their fathers from heaven now awakened in their veins, and the first fracture of their empire echoed across the still young world. The eldest among them were the first to sense it, a subtle tremor in the unity of their kind. The great houses of the Nephilim gathered atop the mountain citadels, their councils once filled with songs of wisdom and creation. But now, voices rose in contention. The sons of Semjaza, descended from the first of the fallen Watchers, claimed that the right to rule belonged to them alone, for their father was the highest among those who had descended. The sons of Azazel argued that they were the keepers of heaven's true knowledge, the forgers of metal, the wielders of divine flame. The children of others, Arakiel, Sariel, Kakabeel, each declared their lineage supreme, each invoking their sire's name as proof of celestial favor. The mountain winds carried their debates across the valleys, but those debates soon turned to accusations, and accusations to war cries. The heavens, once their shared heritage, became a banner they tore between themselves. The words of brotherhood turned bitter, and the sacred fire in their hearts grew cold. Schism began with symbols, emblems carved upon shields and stones, sigils drawn from ancient star maps that each claimed as their inheritance. But symbols became armies. The first Nephilim warbands formed, their soldiers bearing weapons wrought from forbidden craft, blades of heavenly alloy, spears inscribed with runes that shimmered in unnatural light. Their forges burned day and night, consuming forests, mountains, and men alike. What had once been the art of creation had become the engine of destruction. The world shuddered beneath their feet. Valleys became battlegrounds, rivers ran dark, and the earth drank the blood of beings too mighty to die quietly. Brother faced brother, and each strike of their swords cracked the ground as if the planet itself recoiled from the violence. Light against light, the poets of old would later say, and heaven's sons fell by heaven's sons. Humankind watched in terror. Their gods, those they had worshipped as protectors, were now destroyers. Temples burned and cities collapsed beneath the weight of their fury. The people fled to the wilderness, crying out to heaven for mercy, but heaven was silent. The faithful angels, bound by divine order, could only watch as their kin devoured themselves. In their rage, the Nephilim unlocked secrets that should have remained veiled. Some called upon the hidden arts their fathers had whispered, sorcery rooted in the knowledge of stars and elements. They wove spells that bent the natural world to their will, commanding storms and fire. Others delved into the depths, calling upon the powers of the earth itself, awakening things that slept beneath creation. The air became thick with corruption, the soil trembling with unnatural energy. From the high peaks to the sea's edge, the wails of war echoed like thunder. Mountains split where giants clashed, and lightning crowned their battles as though heaven itself marked every death. Their bodies, vast and terrible, lay strewn across the plains, monuments of decay, reminders of what divine pride could birth. Amidst the carnage, there were those few who still remembered their purpose. Some Nephilim turned away from the slaughter, retreating into solitude, their hearts heavy with guilt. They spoke of the Creator in hushed tones, of the beauty they had lost, and of the blood that cried out from the ground. Yet even repentance could not halt the momentum of destruction. Once the first blood was spilled, the curse of rebellion could not be undone. In the heavens, Grief fell like unseen rain. The loyal angels mourned the fall of their brothers' children. What was once the reflection of divine majesty had become a mirror of ruin. And God, in His mercy, waited, allowing the fullness of corruption to reveal itself before judgment came. The earth, once filled with harmony, was now heavy with violence, and the echoes of that age still hum beneath the soil where their bones rest unseen. The sons of the Watchers no longer called each other kin. They were now lords of shattered realms, kings of dust, ruling from towers built on the graves of their own brothers. The sky above them burned red in the twilight of their pride, and even the stars seemed to fade, as if creation itself turned its face away. The Nephilim, once the wonder of the world, had become its curse. Their unity was broken, their purpose lost. They had forgotten the songs their fathers once sang before the throne, songs of obedience and light. All that remained was the sound of war, the thunder of giant footsteps, the clash of impossible strength, and the mourning of the earth beneath them. Thus began the civil strife that would end their age. The first empire of heaven's sons had cracked beyond repair, and the blood of brothers cried out to heaven. The war is inevitable. Even heaven watches in silence as the sons of angels draw their first blood, and the earth prepares to bear witness to the ruin of its mightiest children. The day came when silence itself could bear no more. The air, once thick with tension, split open with the roar of war. Across the plains of the ancient world the Nephilim marched, giants of flame and thunder, their armor forged from the metals of heaven, their eyes burning with the pride of fallen stars. Mountains quaked beneath their feet. The sky above them churned, as though heaven itself recoiled from the violence it beheld. On that dreadful dawn the clans gathered, each claiming divine right, each declaring that their blood carried the truest spark of heaven. The sons of Semjaza arrayed themselves in the east, beneath banners of gold that shimmered like the morning sun. To the west stood the children of Azazel, cloaked in shadow and flame, their weapons alive with the forbidden fire their father had once taught men to master. Between them stretched the fertile valley, green and trembling, the cradle of the earth that had never known such wrath. Their kings towered above the host, names that would echo through human myth for millennia. Gilgamesh, the lion of the dawn, whose roar could shake the wind from the trees. Anak, the iron-blood, whose spear was said to pierce the very breath of life. And among them, Nimrah of the seven lights, a queen among giants, radiant and terrible, who carried the sword her father had forged in the forges of the stars. Their eyes met across the valley, and the air grew heavy with the weight of their hatred. Then came the sound, a single horn, deep and mournful, blown by hands that once built temples for peace. The sky darkened. Lightning tore through the heavens like veins of fire. The Nephilim armies surged forward, their strides like earthquakes, their voices shaking the roots of the mountains. But the battle that followed was not a battle as men understand it. It was a convulsion of creation, a war between beings whose breath could level forests and whose strength could tear the earth. The plains split as they clashed. Each strike rang like thunder, echoing across the edges of the world. Trees ignited from the force of their blows. Rivers turned to steam beneath their feet. The clouds above, drawn by their fury, swirled into storms of light and ash. Their weapons gleamed with celestial craft, blades that shimmered with the echo of starlight, spears that sang as they were hurled, stones that flew like meteors. The arts their fathers had forbidden, the very knowledge that once brought ruin to the heavens, now fueled the destruction of the earth. Their power was a hymn of rebellion sung in fire. And mankind, the children of dust, stood caught between gods and judgment. Villages vanished in the wake of their battles. The cries of mortals rose like smoke, but the giants heard nothing, each consumed by pride, each driven by the desire to prove their dominion. Those who survived fled into caves and forests, trembling, whispering stories that would one day become myths of angry gods and warring deities. The heavens watched in silence. The angels who had not fallen looked upon the earth and wept, for what they saw was not strength but ruin. The Nephilim, born from light, were now devouring the world they were meant to illuminate. And yet the Creator did not intervene, not yet. For every act of rebellion must be allowed to reach its fullness before justice descends. The earth groaned beneath their weight. Mountains crumbled where their battles raged. Oceans surged beyond their bounds. Violence filled the land, says the ancient record, and it was no mere metaphor. Even the wind carried the sound of mourning, and the soil, drenched in the blood of giants, cried out to heaven for deliverance. In the heart of the battlefield, as thunder rolled and the ground cracked open, Gilgamesh met Anak beneath a sky split by flame. Their blows rang like bells of doom. Each strike sent ripples through creation itself. When Anak fell, the ground drank deeply, and fire rose from the wound as though the earth itself rejected the blood of angels. The victors raised their weapons in triumph, but their victory tasted of ash. For with each slain brother, their kind drew closer to extinction. The skies rumbled, not with the noise of battle, but with the groan of something eternal stirring. The clouds gathered, heavy with unspoken grief. For even as the giants warred, the unseen hand of the Creator began to move. Judgment was awakening, not in rage, but in sorrow. The angels who stood upon the thresholds of heaven bowed their heads, for they knew what must come next. The plains that had once been green lay blackened. Smoke rose like incense to the heavens, but it was not worship, it was lamentation. The world had become a tomb for its mighty ones, and in that ruin, humanity learned a truth too terrible to speak, that even beings born of heaven could destroy themselves when they forgot who made them. As the storms gathered and the thunder deepened, the last of the Nephilim kings looked toward the sky, not in defiance, but in fear. For somewhere beyond the veil of clouds they felt it, the sorrow of the one who made them, the weight of a grief deeper than wrath. But beneath the noise of war, a new force begins to stir, the Creator's grief, quiet yet infinite, preparing to break the silence that has endured since the beginning. When the echoes of war began to fade, the earth lay silent beneath the weight of ruin. Smoke rose from the plains where giants had fallen, their bodies dark against the trembling horizon. Rivers, once clear as crystal, now ran red. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and grief. The roar of the mighty had ended, not in triumph but in desolation. And above this broken world, heaven watched in solemn stillness. High beyond the veil of stars, the watchers, their wings dimmed, their glory veiled, stood in mourning. They had seen their sons devour the world, each blow of their war a wound upon creation itself. What they had once called love had become the seed of death. The watchers, bound by their transgression, could no longer ascend nor fully dwell among men. They were trapped in the space between, their eyes ever upon the ruin they had wrought, their hearts echoing with the silence of God. Enoch, the righteous man who walked with the Almighty, had spoken of them. He saw their sorrow in visions of flame and shadow. "You shall have no peace," he had written, "for your sons will consume one another, and the earth will cry out beneath their corruption." His words carried through the heavens like thunder muffled by distance. The watchers had once laughed at prophets, now they trembled at their truth. They gathered upon the high places, the ancient watchers of the world's edge, and wept. Each tear fell like starlight upon the earth, unseen by men. They called out to the Creator not for pardon but for the end of their torment. "We have sinned against the order of heaven," they cried, "and our offspring have defiled the world. Have mercy, O Lord, upon the work of your hands." But no voice answered them. For heaven's silence was not absence, it was judgment restrained. The Almighty did not answer with thunder, nor send legions of angels to cleanse the earth. Instead, there was stillness, deep, unbroken, deliberate. The watchers mistook it for indifference, but it was mercy still holding its breath. For wrath and compassion in God are never separate. They are two edges of the same divine sorrow. In that silence, creation itself began to mourn. The winds whispered through desolate valleys. The trees, stripped of fruit and shadow, stood like witnesses at a funeral. The animals fled from the ruins, driven by instinct older than memory. Even the stars seemed to dim, as if veiling their gaze from the sight of corruption. The world, once vibrant with song, now groaned in the language of grief. In the courts of heaven the council gathered. The seraphim and the elders, those who had never strayed, stood before the throne. Beneath the sea of glass they beheld the earth, scarred, blood-stained, trembling. "How long?" they asked. "How long shall violence cover the land?" The question hung in eternity's air, and the answer came not in words but in will. For divine justice does not rush. It ripens like fruit on the tree of time. The Almighty looked upon creation, not in rage but in pain. For every act of rebellion is born of love betrayed. The watchers had chosen their desire over their duty, and the cost was the corruption of all they were sent to protect. Yet even now the Creator waited. Judgment delayed is not weakness, it is patience stretched to its final thread. Heaven waited, not for the giants to repent, for their hearts were stone, but for one righteous man to rise among men, the vessel through whom salvation would begin again. On earth, humanity wandered the ruins in fear. They built small fires in the shadows of fallen cities, praying to whatever fragments of heaven they still remembered. Some called to the God of their fathers, others cried out to the ghosts of the giants, begging for peace from the very hands that had destroyed them. Their prayers ascended through the smoke like broken wings, and though the Almighty did not yet answer, He heard. Among the faithful, whispers began, whispers of a man who walked with God, whose heart remained pure in a world of ruin. His name would not yet be spoken aloud in the halls of heaven, but the angels knew it. The line of Seth still carried the breath of divine obedience, and from that lineage, the floodgates of redemption would one day open. Meanwhile, the watchers sank deeper into despair. Their names, once sung in radiant light, were now curses upon the lips of men. They watched their children die by their own hands, their legacies burned, their empires turned to dust. And as the stars wheeled silently above, they felt the weight of eternity press upon them, the unbearable knowing that they had unmade the harmony they were born to guard. In the quiet that followed, heaven and earth both seemed to hold their breath. It was the stillness before judgment, the sacred pause before the storm. The watchers wept. Humanity waited. The angels bowed in sorrow. And the Creator, whose silence filled all things, watched the world He loved begin to drown, not yet in water but in its own violence. Heaven's silence will soon break. Judgment will come, but not through angels of wrath. It will come through the obedience of a single man who still walks with God. In a world drowning in corruption, where the sons of heaven had turned creation into a battlefield, and the hearts of men had grown as cold as the stones they worshipped, one man still walked in harmony with the voice of God. His name was Noah. He was not mighty as the Nephilim, nor radiant as the watchers once were, yet within his heart burned a light that no shadow could quench. When the heavens looked upon the earth and found nothing but violence and decay, that light became the last reflection of divine order left among men. The scriptures record it simply. Noah was a righteous man, blameless among his generation. Noah walked with God. But those words hold the weight of worlds. While kings and giants carved their names into mountains, Noah's strength was found in obedience. His lineage remained pure, untouched by the mingling that had defiled the world. His faith was his fortress, his humility his crown. Each morning, as the sun rose red over lands marred by war, Noah would lift his eyes to the sky and listen. In the silence where others heard nothing, he heard the whisper of the eternal. The voice that had once spoken to Adam in the garden now called to him in warning. "The end of all flesh has come before me," said the Lord, "for the earth is filled with violence through them. Build for yourself an ark." It was not the command of a destroyer, but the plea of a creator yearning to preserve what little remained good. And Noah obeyed. Without argument, without proof, he began the impossible task of salvation in the midst of scorn. The world around him laughed, men of war mocked his labor, and the remnants of the Nephilim sneered from their crumbling citadels. To them, his wooden vessel was folly, a whisper against a hurricane. Yet Noah worked on, guided by divine precision. Cubit by cubit, beam by beam, he built not merely a ship but a promise carved in cedar. The people called him mad. They had seen the heavens sealed in silence for generations. They believed no flood could come, no judgment could fall. The skies above had always held back their waters, and the rivers had always known their bounds. To them, Noah's message of coming destruction was the delusion of an old man clinging to a forgotten God, but corruption blinds before it destroys. In their laughter, they sealed their fate. As Noah built, the world decayed further. The Nephilim, weary from endless strife, began to sense something moving beyond their wars. The earth beneath them groaned louder, the skies dimmed, and the very air thickened with foreboding. Though they no longer sought the Creator, even they could feel his silence shifting into sorrowful resolve. Some mocked it still, believing their power could withstand any wrath. Others grew restless, haunted by dreams of rising waters. The last of their civil wars flickered in the distance, like dying embers of a doomed fire. Meanwhile, Noah gathered his family, his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and taught them the fear of the Lord. He told them of Adam's fall, of the Watcher's descent, of the covenant that once bound heaven and earth. In his voice there was no despair, only reverent certainty. He was not building to escape judgment, but to carry grace through it. Each plank he laid, each nail he drove, was an act of worship. As years passed, the ark took shape, a mountain of wood amid a valley of disbelief. Its frame gleamed beneath the sun, a silent sermon to a world that had forgotten holiness. Children who once mocked grew old, still laughing, their hearts unmoved. The watchers looked upon it with dread, for they knew what it meant. Their rebellion had come to full term. The mercy that once delayed had reached its appointed hour. And so heaven began to prepare. Clouds gathered on horizons that had never known storm. The animals stirred, guided by a hand unseen. From distant forests and hidden valleys, pairs began to move toward the ark, beasts of burden, birds of sky, creatures unknown to men, all drawn by the quiet summons of their Maker. It was the calm before divine intervention, the breath before the flood. Noah stood before the vessel, his hands stained with earth and faith, and looked to the sky. Around him, the laughter of men still rang, but he no longer heard it as mockery. It was the sound of a dying age, blind to its own ending. His heart was heavy with compassion. He wept not for himself, but for the world that would not turn back. Heaven watched, and the angels held their peace. The Creator's grief deepened, but so did his mercy. Judgment and salvation were about to meet upon the waters, and one man's obedience would become the hinge upon which the future of all living would turn. The final days before the deluge were strangely quiet. The sun rose and set in the same rhythm, the wind whispered no warning, and the seas lay still. Yet beneath that calm, the heartbeat of the world quickened. The ark stood ready, a monument to faith amid ruin, its doors awaiting the touch of the divine. As Noah obeys, the heavens darken, and the last civil war among the Nephilim ignites in desperate fury. Their final defiance before the judgment of waters begins. The end had come, though few understood it. The sky, once serene and luminous, had turned the color of iron. The sun dimmed behind veils of heavy cloud, and the winds began to whisper like mourning spirits. Across the shattered earth, the last of the Nephilim gathered, driven not by unity but by desperation. Their wars had consumed empires, their pride had scorched the soil, and now, as heaven's silence thickened into judgment, they fought one final time, not for dominion but for remembrance. The great kings of the giants, once radiant with stolen glory, stood upon their ruined thrones. Gilgamesh the Lion of the Dawn, Anak the Ironblood, Nimrod the Queen of Seven Lights, names that once struck awe now trembled on the tongues of men like fatting curses. Their cities, once magnificent, lay in ruin. Pillars cracked, temples sank, and their golden streets were choked with the dust of their own collapse. The air shimmered with unnatural light, the lingering residue of their forbidden arts. What had been the marvel of the world had become its mausoleum. Brother still turned against brother. Blades forged from celestial metals rang out across empty plains. The rivers that once nourished life now ran with crimson streams. They struck with fury beyond mortal measure, each blow shaking the foundations of mountains, each cry rising like thunder into the firmament. The ground split beneath their weight, swallowing the monuments they had built in pride. Their own power had become the instrument of their extinction. And yet, even in ruin, they were terrible to behold. Their armor gleamed like fallen stars, their weapons burned with the memory of heaven. To mortal eyes they were gods still, though gods undone. The people who had once worshipped them now fled from their shadows, seeking caves and high places, praying for the end. The skies above them pulsed with a strange electricity, the first heartbeat of the coming storm. The heavens stirred. The angels who had watched in sorrow now prepared for their appointed task. Their eyes shone with holy fire, but their hands did not yet move, for the word of the Almighty had not yet been spoken. The judgment that was forming was not theirs to wage. It would come not by sword nor flame, but by the very waters that had once given birth to the world. Lightning forked across the darkening sky, tracing veins of light through clouds swollen with wrath. The winds gathered from the four corners of the earth, bending trees, sweeping through the desolate cities where giants once ruled. The air trembled with a sound that was not thunder, but something deeper, the groan of the earth itself, bearing witness to the weight of sin. The earth is filled with violence, the ancient record declares, and it cries out before me, and cry it did. Every stone, every drop of blood, every whisper of the wind seemed to plead for cleansing. The Nephilim kings, sensing what even their pride could no longer deny, looked toward the heavens. For the first time since their creation, fear entered their hearts. Not fear of death, they knew they were already doomed, but fear of the voice that had once spoken their existence into being. Some raised their weapons against the sky, hurling defiance into the storm. Others fell to their knees in silence, understanding that no strength, no lineage, no power of heaven's rebellion could stand before what was coming. Their cities became tombs. Great ziggurats crumbled like sand. Temples of stone sank into the earth as if swallowed by invisible hands. The sea advanced inch by inch, creeping across the land like a rising memory. The storm above deepened into a living thing, its veins of light flashing like eyes that saw all, its rumble like the slow, gathering breath of God. Far away, Noah and his sons worked in silence. The ark stood completed, its timbers sealed, its doors ready to close. Animals gathered in solemn procession, their movements guided by a will older than creation itself. While the world waged its last war, salvation waited quietly beneath darkening skies. And still the giants fought. They fought as the rain began to fall, not yet torrents but droplets heavy as tears. They fought as the winds howled and the heavens opened wider. Their shouts were swallowed by thunder, their strength dissolved in futility. The rain washed their blood into the rivers into the sea, and the sea into the coming flood. Then in a single moment the first deluge fell. The heavens burst forth with sound and fury, and the battle that had lasted for generations was silenced in an instant. The earth convulsed, the mountains bowed, and the plains disappeared beneath the rushing waters. The last of the Nephilim roared against the storm, their cries drowned by creation's cleansing song. The angels turned their faces away, not from triumph but from grief. The world was ending, and with it, the children of their fallen brethren. The Creator's judgment had arrived, not as fire but as mercy too deep to measure. For in the destruction of the corrupt came the preservation of the pure. The waters rose, the cities vanished. The bones of the giants sank beneath silt and shadow, buried in silence. The age of the Nephilim had ended, and the world, reborn in sorrow, would begin again. When the waters come, even their bones will vanish, but their spirits will not, for judgment can cleanse the earth, but it cannot yet silence what lingers in the unseen. The sky broke open. The first drop fell like the tear of God upon a trembling world, and then another and another, until the heavens themselves poured forth their sorrow. From the deeps of the earth, fountains erupted with violent force, tearing through mountains and valleys alike. The boundaries of creation, once spoken into perfect order, now dissolved in divine reversal. The waters above met the waters below, and the breath of judgment filled the air. The flood had come. Noah stood within the ark, the air around him heavy with the cries of beasts and the groaning of the storm. The door had been sealed, not by his hand, but by the hand of the Almighty himself. Outside, the world howled in defiance and despair. The laughter that once mocked him was now swallowed by thunder. Waves of judgment rose higher than towers, sweeping through the plains where the Nephilim had waged their wars. The voices of the mighty were no longer triumphant, they were desperate. The Nephilim, those once called gods, cried out to the heavens that had birthed them. Their roars echoed through the storm, shaking the mountains, but the skies gave no answer. They clawed at cliffs, grasped at the edges of their sinking temples, and reached for clouds that would not save them. The same power that had raised them now unmade them, as the Creator reclaimed his world from their corruption. The waters rose, unstoppable, indifferent to strength or lineage. Cities disappeared beneath rolling waves, forests bent beneath torrents of rain. Stone pillars carved with ancient pride dissolved into silt. The rivers merged into oceans, and the oceans into a single endless sea. From horizon to horizon the earth was erased, reborn in chaos. And amid the deluge, one vessel moved in silence, the ark, the cradle of mercy adrift upon divine wrath. Within its wooden heart Noah prayed. His voice, faint against the roar of creation's undoing, reached heaven not as a plea but as worship. "O Lord," he whispered, "you are righteous in all your ways." His faith was the final note of obedience in a world that had forgotten the song. The animals within stirred uneasily. Thunder rolled like the footsteps of angels across the firmament. Every living thing that had drawn breath beyond those sealed walls now perished. Yet even in that destruction there was a terrible peace, a stillness born of justice fulfilled. The flood was not chaos, it was cleansing. The wrath of God flowed with purpose, not rage. It washed away what had defiled creation, making room for new beginnings. In the heavens the angels beheld it all. They stood upon the edge of eternity, silent and bowed. The watchers who had not fallen wept for their kin and for the world below. Some covered their faces, unable to gaze upon the weight of divine sorrow. Others sang softly, a hymn older than the stars, a song of lament and renewal, a melody that stitched together grief and glory. For they knew that even in this destruction, love was at work. The earth, once filled with violence, was now silent beneath the waters. The cries of the Nephilim faded, their voices swallowed by the deep. Their mighty bodies sank into darkness, entombed beneath the flood's eternal weight. No monuments would remain, no legends to defy the truth. Only whispers carried by the currents, memories of a world that had once believed itself immortal. Days passed into nights, nights into weeks, and still the rains did not cease. The ark drifted across the endless expanse like a single heartbeat in a vast, sleeping ocean. Lightning split the skies, illuminating the waves like the folds of a living being. The world had become a cathedral of water, vast and terrible, where creation and judgment knelt together before the throne of God. Inside the ark, Noah's family huddled in reverent quiet. The sounds of the storm became the rhythm of their prayers. Each crash of thunder reminded them of the cost of disobedience. Each lull between the waves whispered of mercy waiting beyond the storm. And then, as suddenly as it began, the rain began to slow. The fury of the heavens softened to a steady sigh. The fountains of the deep sealed once more, and the hand that had unmade now began to restore. The storm subsided, leaving behind an earth transformed, washed, purified, and still. Above the calm waters, the clouds parted, and sunlight broke through for the first time in 40 days. The light fell upon the ark like a benediction, its reflection gleaming upon the water's surface like a covenant unspoken. Heaven had remembered mercy. But beneath the beauty of that calm, something unseen stirred in the depths. For while flesh had perished, the spirits of the giants, the restless echoes of their rebellion, did not fade. In the shadowed reaches of Sheol they awakened, bound by divine decree yet driven by ancient rage. Their cries, faint but eternal, began to rise from the abyss, promising that the war between heaven and corruption was not yet done. The flood had ended the world, but not the story. From ruin would come renewal, and from judgment grace. Yet even as the ark floated toward a new dawn, the unseen realm began to whisper again. The waters had washed the earth clean, but the heavens still heard the echoes of defiance beneath the waves. The waters recede, and light returns. But unseen in the depths, the spirits of the giants awaken in Sheol, restless shadows waiting for the next chapter of the war between heaven and earth. When the last wave fell silent and the sun rose upon a reborn world, the earth seemed cleansed, its scars washed away by mercy and judgment intertwined. The ark rested upon the heights of Ararat, and from its doors, new life would one day spill across the earth. But beneath that fresh horizon in the unseen depths of creation, something dark and ancient still stirred. For though the bodies of the giants had perished in the flood, their spirits did not die. The Book of Enoch speaks of it with a trembling clarity. And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. They were neither angel nor man, neither mortal nor immortal. Their flesh had been erased, but their essence, born of heaven's rebellion and earth's clay, could not return to either realm. They became exiles of existence, shadows without bodies, doomed to wander the world they once ruled. Their curse was both justice and continuation. The angels who had fallen were bound beneath the earth, chained until the day of reckoning, but their offspring were left adrift, restless, unseen, and unending. They roamed the ruins of their drowned cities, drifting through the waters that buried them, whispering through the stones that once bore their names. The winds carried their lament, and the darkness learned to speak with their voices. These disembodied spirits, stripped of power but not of will, soon turned their hunger toward the living. They sought the warmth of flesh, the pulse of life they had once known through their human mothers. They became parasites of being, wandering spirits that craved embodiment but could never find peace within it. When the winds howled across the plains of the new world, they carried more than sound. They carried longing. They moved unseen among men, whispering thoughts of pride, of fear, of lust, the same poisons that had once destroyed their fathers. Their presence was subtle like the chill of air in a room that should be still. They did not sleep, nor could they rest. They hated the light, for it reminded them of what they had lost, and they despised humanity, for it carried the image of the God they had defied. Their war did not end with flesh. It simply changed its form. In those early generations after the flood, when mankind began to rebuild and plan anew, strange whispers spread among the tribes. Children spoke of dreams filled with voices calling from the earth. Shepherds swore they saw shadows move against the stars. The first altars to false gods rose not in defiance but in fear, an attempt to appease what they could not understand. Thus began the age of idols, of spirits behind stone and wood, feeding upon worship that belonged only to the Creator. Theologians would later speak of them as unclean spirits, not fallen angels themselves, but the echoes of their sin. Where the watchers had rebelled in pride, their children rebelled in despair. They were fragments of a broken lineage, remnants of a corruption that the flood could wash away from the soil, but not from the unseen. Their presence became the first whisper of what humanity would one day call possession. The war between heaven and rebellion now moved beneath the surface of perception. No longer fought with weapons of iron or fire, it took place in the realm of thought, of temptation, of unseen influence. The giant spirits became the architects of deception, sowing chaos in silence, shaping the myths of nations. They wore many names, daimons, shades, familiars, but their origin was singular. They were the restless souls of divine disobedience, chained not by walls but by their own hunger for form. In moments of eerie calm, their voices would still rise, echoing faintly through creation like the memory of thunder. To prophets and seers, they appeared as shadows behind dreams. To those without faith, they were the unseen sickness of the soul. Humanity, unaware of their true origin, began to worship them as gods or curse them as monsters, never knowing they were both, the remnants of giants, the ghosts of heaven's rebellion. Even the angels who watched from the higher realms mourned this half-life. For in every shadow of evil, they saw the reflection of what once was glorious. Yet divine justice had spoken. The spirits of the giants would wander until the appointed time, when the Redeemer would come to command them by name and silence their rebellion forever. For now, the world belonged once more to mankind, but it was not free of war. The battlefield had changed. No longer fought in the open plains of ancient cities, it now lay within hearts and minds, the invisible frontier between faith and fear. And though the waters of the flood had receded, the tide of spiritual conflict had only begun to rise. Every whisper of temptation, every unseen dread, every shadow that moves just beyond sight, these were not born of imagination, but of memory. The Nephilim spirits still roamed, restless as wind, bound to the earth that once bore their pride. Yet even in this, the hand of God remained sovereign. For no spirit, clean or unclean, moves beyond his knowing. Their wandering would not last forever. The Redeemer was already foreseen, the one who would descend not in rebellion but in righteousness to reclaim every realm the fallen had defiled. From the unseen realms where the unclean now stir, the stage begins to shift once more, preparing for the arrival of the promised Redeemer, who will walk the earth and face the shadows born from heaven's own fall. The storm had passed. The waters that once roared with judgment now rested in stillness, mirroring a sky newly washed in light. The earth exhaled for the first time in generations. From the high slopes of Ararat, Noah stepped out into a world both familiar and strange, a world reborn from ruin. Around him, the air was quiet, save for the distant cry of a dove. The flood had ended, but its memory lingered like smoke after fire. Noah fell to his knees upon the soil and built an altar of thanksgiving. Stones, wet from rain, became the foundation of humanity's new covenant with the Creator. Upon it, he offered sacrifice, not to earn mercy, but to honor the mercy already shown. The scent of it rose into the heavens, mingling with the morning mist, and God received it with solemn delight. In that sacred moment, he spoke once more to the man who had walked with him through the end of the world. "Never again," said the voice of the Almighty, "shall the waters become a flood to destroy all flesh. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease." Then the sign of the covenant appeared, a bow of color stretched across the clouds, bending light into promise. It was not the weapon of wrath, but the token of peace, a bow turned upward, away from the earth, resting in the hands of its maker. Humanity would remember it as the rainbow, the eternal reminder that even in justice, God's heart is mercy. Under that covenant, life began again. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the fathers of nations. The world spread outward from their tents, carrying memory, legend, and faith across the continents. Fields once drowned began to bloom. Rivers carved new paths through mountains. The air filled once more with the songs of creation. Humanity, fragile but renewed, began to plant, to build, and to hope. Yet with renewal came remembrance. The survivors of the flood carried not only faith but fear, the knowledge of divine wrath that once swept across the world. Around their fires, elders told the story to their children, of the giants who defied heaven, of the ark that rode the storm, of the God who both destroyed and saved. The tale became the thread that bound generations to reverence. But as the years passed and memories dulled, reverence began to fade into complacency. From the plains of Shinar to the distant lands beyond the Tigris, mankind grew restless again. Ambition whispered where humility once knelt. The shadows of pride, the same seed that felled the watchers and the giants, began to stir in human hearts. Cities rose once more, towers of stone scraping the clouds. The unity that had been meant for worship turned instead toward self-exaltation. The curse of Babel loomed on the horizon, though none yet saw it. But amidst this growing clamor, God's promise remained alive, hidden within a chosen line. Through Shem, the faithful lineage continued, men who still honored the voice of heaven, even as others turned away. In their homes, the covenant was remembered not as myth, but as heritage. From their prayers, the rhythm of righteousness continued, a quiet echo of Noah's obedience. Generations passed, each one carrying the spark of the covenant. The earth filled again with nations, languages, and kings. Some sought the light, others the darkness. Yet among them all, heaven's gaze rested upon one man, born in the distant city of Ur, a man named Abram, son of Terah. While the world around him bowed to the idols of their own hands, Abram's heart heard a whisper, the same whisper that had once called to Noah before the rain. "Leave your country and your kindred," said the voice of the Lord, "and go to the land I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and through you shall all families of the earth be blessed." This was the turning of ages, the passing of the covenant from preservation to promise. Through Abraham, God began to weave the tapestry of redemption that would one day embrace all creation. The floodwaters had cleansed the earth, but the Redeemer would one day cleanse the soul. The bow in the sky was now mirrored by the unseen covenant in a man's heart. Yet even as divine promise unfurled, corruption lingered at the edges. The unclean spirits born from the giants still moved in the unseen, whispering among nations, stirring kings to pride and empires to bloodshed. From Canaan to Egypt, altars rose to false gods, their smoke rising to the same heavens that once glowed with judgment. Humanity had been spared, but the battle for its spirit was far from over. Still, amid the world's noise, the promise stood unbroken. In every generation of Shem's line there remained a remnant, a thread of faith that could not be severed. They were shepherds, wanderers, dreamers of stars and covenant. And through them, heaven's story continued, step by step, toward its fulfillment in one yet to come. Noah's altar had marked the end of one world and the beginning of another. Abraham's journey would mark the path towards salvation itself. Between them stretched the long twilight of humanity, where light and shadow walked side by side, where faith stood as a lamp against the encroaching night. The rainbow faded from the sky, but its meaning endured. The covenant still breathed through time, promising that though evil may rise again, the seed of redemption was already planted. Yet even as God raised new hope through covenant and promise, distant thrones began to tremble, echoes of the Nephilim stirring once more through fallen kings and forgotten empires. The world after the flood gleamed with renewal. The valleys were green again, the rivers flowed in peace, and the air once more carried the song of creation. But deep beneath the serenity of this new dawn, old shadows stirred. Though the waters had cleansed the earth, they had not erased memory or mystery. And as generations passed, whispers began to rise once more of beings unlike other men, figures of immense stature and strength who bore the faint echo of heaven's rebellion within their blood. They were called by many names: Rephaim, Anakim, Emim, Zamzumim. To the eyes of the Israelites they were simply giants, the same word once spoken in fear before the flood. The scriptures record their presence plainly, as if the ancient story had continued its course beneath history's surface. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come of the Nephilim, the spies reported in the Book of Numbers. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. How could it be? How could fragments of the old corruption walk the earth anew? Some say their blood survived through Ham's lineage, carried silently through generations until it awakened again in Canaan's land. Others hold that the spirits of the ancient giants sought out new vessels, finding refuge in the hearts of kings and conquerors who opened themselves to darkness. However it came to be, the truth is simple and sobering. Though the flood had ended their world, it had not ended their legacy. The lands beyond the Jordan bore their mark. In Bashan ruled Og, the last of the Rephaim, whose iron bed measured 13 feet in length. The valleys of Hebron were guarded by the sons of Anak, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, whose presence made Israel's spies tremble. The ancient fear that once haunted mankind returned in the hearts of God's people. The giants had risen again, not in the numbers or splendor of their ancestors, but as remnants of defiance, living monuments to a rebellion long past. And yet, in these towering figures lay a divine paradox. The same patience that once stayed the hand of judgment before the flood was now revealed again. God did not strike them down immediately. He allowed them to remain, scattered through the lands, a test for faith and courage. For the promise to Abraham had been clear: the land of Canaan would be given to his descendants. But before Israel could inherit it, they would have to face not only fortified cities and human armies, but the very echoes of the ancient world itself. The giants stood as both obstacle and revelation. They reminded Israel that the war of heaven and earth had not ceased, it had merely changed form. Every encounter between the people of God and these beings became a reenactment of that eternal conflict, the seed of faith confronting the seed of corruption. The towering Anakim, who filled men with terror, became symbols of what faith must overcome. When Joshua entered the Promised Land, his conquest was more than military, it was cosmic. In each battle, divine justice replayed the old song of judgment and renewal. At Hebron, where the sons of Anak dwelt, the Israelites fought not just for territory, but for the reclaiming of creation itself. Caleb, the faithful spy who had once said, "We are well able to overcome it," became the instrument of that redemption. He drove out the last of the Anakim and sanctified the land with courage born from trust, not strength. But even in their defeat, the story of these post-flood giants lingered. The Rephaim of Bashan, the Emim of Moab, the Zamzumim of Ammon, all were swept away in time, yet their memory haunted Scripture. They became the dark backdrop against which divine faithfulness shone brighter. God's people learned that the greatest threats were not the size of their enemies, but the smallness of their faith. The presence of the giants also carried a quieter, theological weight. In allowing remnants of the Nephilim to remain, God revealed his patience, his willingness to let evil reveal itself fully before final judgment. The giants' existence was not proof of divine neglect, but of divine sovereignty, a reminder that no corruption could stand forever before holiness. To Israel, their existence posed a question that every generation would face. Would they see through fear into faith, or bow to the shadow of the past? And to heaven, it was proof that the war between the sons of God and the sons of men still rippled through time. Even the prophets spoke of these echoes. Isaiah would later write of the Rephaim stirring in Sheol, the shades of the mighty rising to greet fallen kings who joined them in death. It was as if the old rebellion had left a scar upon creation, faint yet eternal, waiting for the day when all things would be set right. And so the giants passed from the stage of history, their blood diluted, their cities forgotten, their names fading into myth. Yet their story did not end. It merely sank deeper, like stones beneath clear water. The land was free of their rule, but their legacy endured in memory and spirit, a warning written into the soil of the world. That pride once raised against heaven always returns in some form, awaiting the day when it will meet its final defeat. These surviving giants, remnants of a broken age, would one day face the descendants of Abraham, not by fate or coincidence, but under divine command, as the ancient war between heaven and rebellion moved once more through human history. The desert winds had barely settled when the children of Israel first beheld the hills of Canaan, the land of promise, the inheritance sworn by oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But before them rose not only mountains and fertile valleys, but shadows of a more ancient kind. For as the tribes approached the borders of the land, they did not find peace awaiting them, but the ghosts of the old rebellion clothed once more in flesh. The giants had returned. The spies sent by Moses moved silently among the Canaanite cities, their hearts heavy with both awe and dread. They saw walls that reached into the sky, towers built by hands too large for mortal men, and gates fashioned of stone that seemed to bear the memory of another world. Everywhere they looked, they saw power, unnatural, towering, familiar to heaven but alien to earth. And among those walls walked men of colossal stature, rulers whose bloodlines traced back to the ancient Anakim, the children of Arba, descended, so the whispers said, from the Nephilim themselves. The report that returned to the camp of Israel trembled with fear. "We are not able to go up against the people," they cried, "for they are stronger than we. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." The words rippled through the camp like a dark wind. Terror spread among the tribes, hope faltered. Once again, as in the days before the flood, humanity stood before the offspring of heaven's corruption and trembled. But this was no longer the age of Noah. This was the age of covenant. The people of Israel did not stand alone, and the giants they feared were not merely men of size, but symbols of an old dominion that God himself had vowed to end. The war was not new. It was the same cosmic conflict reborn upon a new battlefield. The sons of Abraham would now complete what the flood had begun. In Canaan, the land groaned with the weight of its rulers. The city-states were fortified under kings whose might was legendary. Hebron, once Kirjath Arba, was ruled by descendants of the greatest of the Anakim. Bashan lay under the dominion of Og, whose massive iron bed bore silent witness to his unnatural lineage. Across the valleys and plains, the memory of the Nephilim lingered in the blood of kings and warriors. The same pride that once defied heaven now built empires on earth, daring Israel to challenge them. To the spies, it was a vision of impossibility. To God, it was prophecy unfolding. The land they surveyed was not only an inheritance to be taken but a theater for divine justice. The sins of the pre-flood world had survived, not in their full terror, but in remnants, enough to remind creation that the war between heaven and corruption had never truly ended. Yet even as fear gripped the camp, faith found a voice. Caleb of Judah rose among them, his eyes still shining with the reflection of the promise. "Let us go up at once and possess it," he said, "for we are well able to overcome it." His courage was not born of strength but of memory, the remembrance that the same God who had parted seas could also fell giants. Beside him, Joshua the son of Nun echoed the call, "If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land, only fear not." Their words fell upon hearts hardened by terror, and the people hesitated. But heaven did not. For beyond the trembling of men, the divine plan moved forward with quiet certainty. The same patience that once watched Noah build the ark now waited again, allowing time for faith to mature. The giants of Canaan were not obstacles, they were tests, mirrors through which Israel would see its own heart. Each towering warrior, each walled city, each tale of the Anakim was a reminder of the ancient war now being replayed in mortal form. Faith would have to face fear. Obedience would have to confront intimidation. The struggle was more than military. It was spiritual, a renewal of the cosmic cleansing once accomplished by water, now to be completed through covenant obedience and divine partnership. When Moses prayed upon the mountain, the presence of God covered him like a storm of light. He saw not only Canaan but the echo of Eden, not only the giants of flesh but the rebellion of spirit that animated them. What awaited Israel was not merely conquest but cleansing, the removal of those who carried the legacy of defiance. The judgment that had once fallen in flood would now fall by sword, but the purpose was the same: to restore the holiness of the earth. In time, Joshua would lead the people across the Jordan, and the cries of the giants would again shake the land. But this time, the victory would belong not to strength, but to faith. For the God who once silenced the waters now moved with his people, and the promise made to Abraham would be fulfilled upon the bones of the mighty. The giants of Canaan were more than enemies. They were memories of a world that refused to learn. Their downfall would be the seal of a covenant renewed, the proof that no corruption, no matter how ancient, can stand before the purposes of God. Israel's obedience will bring divine partnership, and once more the giants will fall, not by the might of men, but by the hand of heaven, as the old war nears its destined end. The sun rose over the plains of Canaan, its light breaking through veils of morning mist, glinting upon the shields and spears of a nation born in the wilderness. Israel stood upon the edge of inheritance, facing a land both promised and perilous. Before them loomed the fortified cities of the Rephaim, the Anakim, and the Zamzummim, the last embers of the ancient bloodlines that had defied heaven since before the flood. But this time, the armies of the mighty would face not giants of stone or steel, but the living presence of the Almighty Himself moving in covenant power. Joshua, servant of Moses and commander of the Lord's people, stood at the head of the host. The same voice that once spoke to Noah now spoke to him. "Be strong and courageous, for I am with you wherever you go." These words were not mere comfort. They were divine command, the heartbeat of heaven echoing through a mortal leader. The war for the promised land was not a struggle of nations. It was a holy reclamation. The sins that once drowned the world would now be purged by faith and obedience. Before the first sword was lifted, God gave Israel a lesson. Victory would not come by human strength, but by divine order. Jericho, the great city of walls and gates, stood as the test. Its ramparts towered high, its gates unbreakable, its defenders confident. Yet Israel marched not with siege weapons but with silence. For 6 days the priests circled the city, the ark of the covenant borne before them, the trumpets of ram's horns sounding their haunting call. The ark moved like a living flame through the ranks, a golden sign of the presence that once parted seas and confounded empires. Around it the air shimmered with reverence. Angels, unseen yet near, moved in formation beside mortal men. The walls of Jericho, built upon fear and pride, were not prepared for faith made manifest. On the 7th day, as the trumpets sounded and the people shouted as one, the earth itself seemed to answer. The walls crumbled as if the stones remembered the weight of divine command. Jericho fell, not by sword but by obedience. The victory was a song, but it was also a sign. The same God who had judged the world with water now wielded his will through his people. The flood had swept away corruption from the face of the earth. Now Israel, the remnant of faith, would sweep away its remnants from the land of promise. Beyond Jericho lay Bashan, kingdom of Og, last of the Rephaim. His name was a legend whispered in fear, a king of unnatural stature, whose iron bed measured 13 feet in length, preserved as a relic of ancient power. His armies stood upon the highlands, confident in their size and strength. Yet when Israel advanced, the same unseen presence that had silenced Jericho went before them. Og fell, and with him the last throne of the old bloodlines crumbled. Each battle that followed bore the rhythm of divine justice. The sword of Israel was but the instrument. The will behind it was the same that had set the stars in motion. Angels moved with them, not as conquerors of men, but as witnesses of fulfillment. Every victory was a restoration, every defeat of a giant, a step closer to the promise first spoken to Abraham. The chroniclers of old described the campaign not as conquest, but as consecration. The land groaned beneath centuries of corruption, and now it drank deep the blood of those who had defied heaven's law. Yet within the violence was peace, a strange and sacred stillness, because it was not revenge but purification. God was reclaiming the soil itself, preparing it to bear the lineage of the Messiah who would one day walk its hills. Through every clash and every cry, the Ark of the Covenant remained the center, gleaming like captured sunlight. Its golden cherubim faced one another above the mercy seat, wings outstretched, a mirror of the unseen angels hovering above the battlefield. Wherever it rested, victory followed, not because of magic or might, but because the presence of the Holy filled the space it occupied. Israel's courage was not born of arrogance, but of faith. They were instruments of a promise older than the earth itself. When the last of the Anakim were driven from Hebron and the Rephaim from the valleys, the land fell silent once more. The cries of war faded into the hush of completion. Joshua looked upon the conquered plains and saw not glory but obedience fulfilled. The giants were gone, their fortresses reduced to dust. What had begun as terror had ended in testimony. The living God reigns, and his word stands against every ancient power that exalts itself above him. The war for the promised land was not the end of conflict, but the closing of a chapter in the ancient war between heaven and rebellion. Israel's faith had become the floodwaters of this generation, sweeping away the remnants of the corrupted blood, purifying the land for a new story. The fields of Canaan glowed under the sun, no longer haunted by the shadows of the mighty. But in the silence that followed, heaven knew another war would one day come, not of swords and giants, but of hearts and spirits. As the land is purified and the giants fade into legend, another kind of war begins to stir, unseen, spiritual, waiting for the day when heaven itself will descend again to finish what began before the flood. Time moved like a slow river, carrying the memory of giants into the depths of history. The wars of Joshua faded into legend. The lands once ruled by the Anakim became vineyards and cities of peace. The people of Israel prospered. Yet beneath the beauty of the kingdom that rose, the old current of rebellion flowed unseen. The war between heaven and corruption did not end, it changed its form. No longer waged with sword and shield, it now moved in silence, in hearts, in ideas. Centuries passed, and the age of the judges gave way to the age of kings. Israel's tribes united under David, the shepherd from Bethlehem, chosen not for strength but for faith. He was small in stature, yet mighty in spirit, the perfect instrument of divine irony. For when the last echo of the Nephilim rose again, it would fall not by another giant, but by a boy with a sling. In the valley of Elah, the armies of Israel faced Goliath of Gath, a towering warrior whose lineage traced back to the remnants of the Rephaim. His armor gleamed beneath the sun, his spear like a weaver's beam, his words dripping with the arrogance of the ancients. "Choose a man to fight me," he taunted, "and if he kills me, we will serve you." It was the voice of pride reborn, the echo of those who once said, "We will ascend to the heavens." David stepped forward not as a soldier but as a servant of God. "You come to me with a sword and spear," he said, "but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." His stone flew like destiny itself, guided by the same hand that once directed the floodwaters. Goliath fell, and with him the last visible remnant of the ancient defiance. The earth shook, the armies fled, and once again the Creator's promise stood: faith will always strike down the mighty. But while David's victories purified the land, they could not purify the heart of man. Peace brought prosperity, and prosperity brought temptation. His son Solomon inherited the throne and the wisdom of God, a gift unmatched in human history. His words became scripture, his insight touched the fabric of creation. Yet even wisdom can become perilous when curiosity exceeds obedience. Solomon built the temple, and the glory of God descended upon it like fire. The ark rested beneath wings of golden cherubim, the symbol of heaven and earth united once more. But as the years passed, the king's heart began to wander. He sought alliances with foreign nations, marriages with daughters of distant kings. Through diplomacy came idolatry, and through idolatry came corruption. The same forbidden knowledge once whispered by the watchers in ages past began to return, disguised now as culture, beauty, and enlightenment. The altars of the pagan gods rose again, not in the wilderness this time, but within the holy city itself. Incense burned to Ashtoreth, the queen of heaven. Statues of Baal stood beside the temple gates. The very nation chosen to cleanse the land now began to mirror the empires it had overthrown. The wisdom of Solomon, once pure, became tangled in curiosity for mysteries beyond the boundary of revelation. What the ancient watchers had fallen to obtain, knowledge unblessed by obedience, was once again being sought by man. The giants were gone, but their ideas were not. Their philosophies survived through symbols, rituals, and secret knowledge passed down through generations of kings and priests. Power clothed itself in religion, and rebellion wore the mask of progress. The same spiritual contagion that once taught men to worship the stars now taught them to worship themselves. Humanity was not raising towers anymore. They were raising thrones within their own hearts. The prophets watched with grief. They saw the golden age darkening and cried out in warning. "Your wisdom has corrupted you," they said. "Your heart is lifted up because of your beauty." Yet the people did not listen. The sound of harps and feasts drowned the voice of repentance, and in the silence that followed, heaven wept. Solomon's reign ended in splendor, but his legacy was divided. His kingdom split as his heart had split, Israel to the north, Judah to the south. The light that once radiated from Zion dimmed, flickering beneath the shadow of idols. It was not the might of enemies that would undo Israel, but the quiet invasion of the unseen, the return of fallen wisdom disguised as human achievement. Through every generation after, the same pattern returned. Kings who sought truth but flirted with corruption, prophets who spoke but were ignored, priests who remembered but were silenced. The bloodlines of rebellion no longer walked as giants. They moved through history as ideas, infecting nations through pride, seduction, and deceit. The age of giants had been physical. The age of kings was spiritual. Yet both told the same story. Every time man sought to rise above the command of God, he fell beneath the weight of his own greatness. The temple still stood in Jerusalem, its stones gleaming like the covenant itself. Pilgrims came to pray, sacrifices were offered, songs of ascent rose toward the heavens. Yet beneath the surface, the same war continued, unseen but unbroken, the cosmic struggle between obedience and pride, between the Creator's will and the creature's ambition. The giants had vanished from sight, but their inheritance remained alive within the hearts of kings. And from those hearts would one day emerge a new darkness, not of muscle or might, but of spirit and deception. The battlefield had moved again, from sword to soul, from flesh to faith. Israel's story now turns inward, from the clash of armies to the corruption of hearts, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation between divine truth and the unseen rebellion that still lingers beneath the throne of men. The age of kings waned, and with it, the last glimmers of Israel's golden peace. The temple still stood in Jerusalem, its pillars gleaming beneath the sun, but its songs had grown hollow. Beneath the sound of harps and incense, the same rebellion that once filled the pre-flood world now breathed again, in palaces, in markets, in hearts. The giants had fallen, but their spirit endured. It wore new flesh now, human ambition crowned in gold. Across the plains of Shinar, an old name began to rise once more: Babylon. Born from the same soil that had birthed the Tower of Babel, it stood as a city of brilliance and blasphemy. Its ziggurats reached skyward like ancient echoes of the Watcher's defiance, its rivers glittered with wealth, and its kings walked as though they ruled creation itself. Babylon was not merely a kingdom, it was an idea, a reflection of the Nephilim spirit in human form. Power without humility, beauty without obedience. The prophets saw through the splendor. They beheld what men could not, the ancient corruption dressed in the garments of empire. Isaiah's voice broke the stillness of complacency. "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn! You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God." His words struck through time, naming not only a king of Babylon but the power behind him, the same pride that once made angels fall. Babylon's grandeur became a mirror of heaven's rebellion. Its walls were vast, its gates bronze, its gardens suspended between earth and sky. But within its beauty burned the same fever, self-deification. The Nephilim had once declared themselves gods by blood. Babylon did so by conquest and art. Every stone, every law, every melody in its halls whispered the same lie, that creation could exist without its creator. Jeremiah stood in its shadow, tears marking his face as he warned of judgment. "You trusted in your beauty," he cried. "You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor." Yet Babylon's rulers laughed. They had no memory of the flood, no fear of divine justice. They believed their walls invincible, their gods supreme. The same arrogance that drowned the world now sat upon thrones of marble. The prophets spoke with fire, but beneath their lament was hope. For even in wrath, God remembered mercy. Ezekiel, carried by visions, saw the throne of the Almighty moving among the exiles, a chariot of flame and sapphire wheels. The glory of God was not bound to a temple of stone. It followed his people into captivity, proving that even in exile, heaven's plan was unbroken. The prophets reminded Israel that Babylon was not just a city to be overthrown. It was a condition of the soul. Every heart that exalted itself was a tower reaching toward heaven, every act of pride another stone in Babel's rising wall. Humanity's longing to ascend had never died. It simply changed its language. Empires called it progress, scholars called it wisdom, kings called it destiny. But in the heavens it was still rebellion. Isaiah saw further than his own age. In the ruin of kingdoms, he glimpsed a promise glimmering through dust and smoke. "A shoot shall come forth from the stump of Jesse," he wrote, "and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him." From the decay of a fallen world would rise the seed foretold in Eden, the one who would crush the serpent's head and silence the ancient rebellion forever. Babylon's shadow lengthened, spreading over the nations, but so too did the light of prophecy. Through suffering and exile, the people began to understand that the true enemy was not flesh and blood, but the spirit that had haunted creation since the beginning, the hunger to rise without God. The prophets spoke of a Redeemer who would not come as a conqueror of armies but as a servant of light. The proud would fall, the meek would inherit the earth. As Babylon reached its height, its doom was already written in the heavens. Empires that glorify themselves always carry their graves within their foundations. The same stars that watched the fall of the Watchers now watched over another descent, a kingdom built on pride, destined to collapse under its own weight. When the river Euphrates glowed red with the fires of conquest, and the idols of gold fell silent, the words of the prophets were fulfilled. Every Babylon must fall, that Zion might rise. And yet, even amid ruins, God's purpose continued. The exiles who wept by the rivers of Babylon carried with them not despair, but seeds of restoration. In their sorrow was purification, in their longing, preparation. For from their lineage, and from their faith refined in captivity, the promise would one day take flesh. The prophets' voices faded into the scrolls of time, but their words never died. Each lamentation, each oracle of doom and hope, became a bridge between the ancient war and the coming redemption. Babylon's shadow would stretch across generations, but so too would the light destined to overcome it. Out of exile and ruin, a light will arise, not a warrior of flesh, but the Word made flesh, who will descend into the darkness to undo the rebellion that began before the world was drowned. The prophets fell silent, and for 400 years the heavens spoke no new word. No vision stirred the night, no fire touched the altar. The scrolls of Isaiah and Ezekiel remained open, but the voice that once thundered through them now whispered only through memory. Yet silence is never emptiness. Beneath the hush of centuries, another war unfolded, unseen, unspoken, unceasing. It was a war fought not with armies or kings, but within the unseen layers of creation itself. The great rebellion, once waged through angels and giants, now moved through the currents of empires and ideas. The ancient spirits, those restless remnants of the Nephilim, condemned to wander the earth, found new ways to work their will. They could no longer raise towers of stone or cities of divine blood, so they raised empires instead, empires built upon pride, upon knowledge divorced from holiness. The Greeks rose first, bearing gifts of wisdom and beauty, philosophy and art. Yet within their brilliance there glimmered a familiar seduction, the worship of intellect, the exaltation of the self. The same forbidden light once revealed by the Watchers now found new life in the marble halls of Athens. Men spoke of gods who took mortal form, of titans bound in chains beneath the world, of souls ascending through secret knowledge. The wisdom of the Watchers had returned, cloaked in myth and philosophy, its corruption disguised as enlightenment. The unseen powers moved through these new temples of thought. The unclean spirits whispered to poets and priests alike, reviving old languages of rebellion. Mystery schools rose across the Mediterranean, places where men sought to pierce heaven's veil by initiation rather than revelation. They called it wisdom, but it was the same hunger that had once led angels to fall. Then came Rome, an empire of iron and order. Its legions conquered the world, but unseen legions conquered Rome. The spirits of dominion and fear took residence in its grandeur. Temples to unknown gods filled its cities. Emperors were crowned as divine. The same Nephilim spirit that once walked the earth now sat upon thrones of marble, disguised as human will. The Caesars believed themselves sons of heaven, but heaven did not recognize their claim. Humanity felt the weight of these unseen chains. Though the world gleamed with civilization, its soul grew weary. Idols filled the streets, blood was poured upon altars, and prayers ascended into silence. Beneath the glory of empires, there pulsed a quiet despair, the ache of a creation waiting for deliverance. The prophets had spoken of a Redeemer, a light that would dawn after exile, but centuries passed and still the sky remained empty. The faithful clung to promise as to a thread stretched thin across time. In the dark corners of the world, however, faith was not dead. The righteous remnant endured, the quiet ones who still whispered the Psalms by candlelight, who still told their children of Abraham's covenant and David's throne. They watched the stars and wondered when heaven would speak again. The longing of the earth became a kind of prayer, rising not from lips but from history itself. Unseen above them, the angels watched as well. They had seen kingdoms rise and fall, idols crumble and reform, but through it all, the hand of God moved with perfect patience. For though heaven seemed silent, its purpose was never still. The silence between the testaments was not absence, it was incubation. The stage of creation was being cleared, the empires arranged, the hearts of men prepared. The world had exhausted its wisdom, and at last its hunger had ripened into readiness. Among the spiritual realms, the conflict sharpened. The demonic hosts, the offspring of ancient rebellion, sensed something approaching, something pure and unstoppable. They stirred restlessly through the shadows of Rome's temples and the philosophers' halls, trying to tighten their grip before the coming dawn. But even in their darkness they could feel it, a presence drawing near, a tremor in eternity. In Judea, far from the centers of power, the lineage of David remained, a thread unbroken through captivity and time. Hidden within this remnant was the promise first spoken in Eden, renewed through Noah, sealed with Abraham and prophesied by the exiles. It lay dormant like a seed beneath winter soil, waiting for the warmth of divine breath. Then in the heavens movement began. The silence trembled. A messenger of light prepared his descent, carrying words that would end the long night. For in the fullness of time, when the world had grown deaf to its own wisdom and weary of its idols, heaven would once again pierce the veil of flesh. The word that had spoken the worlds into being would soon take on flesh himself. The war that had gone underground would soon surface again, but in a form the darkness could not comprehend. The Redeemer would not come as a titan or a king, but as a child, small and unthreatening, born beneath the stars that once watched angels fall. The heavens, once silent, now leaned close in anticipation. Every spirit, every realm, every fragment of creation held its breath. For after 400 years of waiting, the voice that first said, "Let there be light," was about to speak again, not to command the world, but to enter it. Then, in the fullness of time, heaven itself enters the battlefield, the Word made flesh, the light returning to the world that once drowned in shadow. In the fullness of time, when the world had grown weary of its own kingdoms and philosophies, heaven opened once more, not in thunder or flame, but in silence. The same voice that had once spoken creation into being now whispered into the womb of a virgin. And in that moment, eternity took on breath. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It was the most paradoxical act in all of existence. The very God whom the heavens could not contain entered the frailty of human form, not as another hybrid of rebellion, but as perfect union, divinity and humanity joined without corruption. Where the watchers had taken flesh in arrogance, the Son of God took flesh in humility. Their descent had been theft, his was redemption. Theirs was defiance, his was obedience. Far from the marble palaces of Rome and the towers of Babylon, the Creator entered his creation in a manger, among the lowly, beneath the stars that once watched the fall of angels. There was no blaze of celestial armor, no roar of thunder, only the soft cry of an infant breaking the silence of the ages. Yet that sound was the tremor of the cosmos, the first note of a new creation being written upon the old. Bethlehem was smaller than the cities of the giants, humbler than the halls of kings, yet the heavens bent low over it as over a throne. Shepherds stood in awe as angels filled the night sky, proclaiming peace on earth to those who would receive it. The same heavenly host that once watched in sorrow as the sons of God defiled creation now sang in joy, for the true Son of God had come to restore it. From that manger light began to spread. It was not a light of conquest but of quiet power. Each breath of the child was the reversal of the ancient curse. In him heaven and earth met again, not through rebellion but through love. The incarnation was the great undoing, the sacred counterstroke to the corruption of the Watchers. Where they had descended to bring forbidden knowledge, he descended to bring holy truth. Where they had corrupted flesh, he sanctified it. Where they had enslaved humanity through fear, he came to free it through faith. And the powers of darkness trembled. The spirits of the Nephilim, bound to the earth and roaming unseen, felt the pulse of divine life enter the world. The unclean realms shuddered as the presence they had long fled now stood among them in mortal form. Demons that once roamed unchecked sensed the approach of their judgment. The war that had gone underground for centuries now stirred again, not with armies, but with a single heartbeat that carried eternity within it. In the unseen realms, angels watched in wonder. They who had seen the creation of stars now beheld their Maker as a child, wrapped in human weakness. They marveled at the wisdom of it, how divine justice could clothe itself in mercy, how infinite glory could hide within the folds of mortality. "Who is this King of glory?" they whispered to one another, though they knew the answer. He was the one who had walked with Adam, who had spoken to Noah, who had promised Abraham, who had guided Moses through the sea. Now he had come himself, not as fire or cloud, but as man among men. The Magi came from the east, following a star that burned with otherworldly brilliance. They brought gifts fit for a king, a priest, and a sacrifice, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Even they, wise in the mysteries of the heavens, could not comprehend that they knelt before the fulfillment of all wisdom. Their eyes saw a child, their spirits beheld the Creator clothed in flesh. Meanwhile, in the courts of darkness, the fallen powers conspired. The ancient rebellion recognized the danger. Herod, a puppet of Rome and a vessel of fear, became the instrument through which the enemy sought to destroy the light. The massacre of the innocents was not mere cruelty. It was the echo of the old war, the same violence that once filled the earth returning in desperation. Yet even in death's attempt, prophecy triumphed. The child was carried safely into Egypt as the shadows seethed in futility. In those early years of silence, the heavens waited and watched. The boy grew in wisdom and stature, yet his divinity remained veiled. The Creator walked the earth unnoticed among his creation. The same ground that had once shaken beneath the feet of giants now felt the gentle tread of its true king. The same sky that had poured out wrath in the days of Noah now looked upon mercy incarnate. The war that began before time was now entering its final act, not through might but through meekness, not through armies but through love. The incarnation was the turning point of eternity. Heaven had invaded flesh not to destroy it, but to redeem it. The curse of rebellion would meet its conqueror not in power, but in purity. The very act that had once shattered the order of creation, the union of the divine with the human, was now remade in perfect righteousness. And so the world stood at the edge of revelation, unaware of how close salvation had come. The ancient powers trembled in their unseen places, and even the earth seemed to hold its breath. The dawn of redemption had broken, but the darkness had not yet yielded. But as the light began to rise, the darkness gathered in defiance, the spirits of the giants stirring once more through demonic resistance, preparing to meet the Son of Man in open confrontation. When the Son of God began his ministry upon the dust of Galilee, the unseen world trembled. The silence of centuries was shattered not by the trumpet of angels, but by the voice of a man speaking with divine authority. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me," he declared, "for he has anointed me to proclaim liberty to the captives." Those words echoed through eternity, reaching into the depths of the abyss where the spirits of the giants stirred in restless defiance. From the moment Christ began to teach, the invisible war that had long simmered beneath the world erupted into open conflict. The unclean spirits, those ancient remnants of the Nephilim, recognized him before men did. In the synagogues and the streets they cried out through the mouths they possessed, their voices filled with dread. "What have we to do with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? We know who you are, the Holy One of God." It was not merely fear that made them tremble, it was recognition. The same word that had spoken them into being now stood before them clothed in flesh. Every exorcism became a battle not of strength, but of divine authority reclaiming creation. Where once they had ruled through terror and secrecy, now they were dragged into the light. With a single command, "Be silent and come out of him," Christ unmade what rebellion had built. Among all his encounters, one stands above the rest. The man of the Gerasenes, tormented and alone, living among the tombs. His body bore the scars of chains that could not hold him. His eyes reflected centuries of torment. When Jesus stepped onto the shore, the storm that had raged over the sea stilled, but within this man, another storm began to scream. The unclean spirits within him cried out as one voice, "What have we to do with you, Son of the Most High God? Have you come to torment us before the time?" They named themselves Legion, for they were many fragments of the old rebellion bound together by misery. These were not new demons. They were the ancient offspring of the giants, the unquiet echoes of a corruption that once drowned the world. Now they faced the very presence that had judged their fathers in the flood. Their time of dominion was ending. Christ did not answer their rage with wrath. His power was not loud but absolute. With calm authority he granted their plea to depart into a herd of swine, a gesture not of weakness but of judgment. The animals, unable to bear the presence of such defilement, rushed into the sea, vanishing beneath the waves, the same waters that had once cleansed the earth of their kind. What had begun with the flood now found fulfillment in a single act of compassion, the liberation of one soul. The disciples who witnessed it could scarcely speak. They had seen storms obey him, but now they saw spirits bow before him. They began to understand that the kingdom he spoke of was not merely earthly, it was cosmic. Every healing, every command over the unseen, was a reclamation of creation from the hands of corruption. Heaven's hierarchy was being restored, not through legions of angels, but through love in human form. From village to village the pattern continued. Where he walked, darkness fled. The blind saw, the lame walked, and the possessed were freed. Each encounter was more than mercy, it was warfare in disguise. When he laid his hand upon the afflicted, heaven itself reached into the chaos that had once ruled the world. The unclean spirits, once bold and boastful, now trembled in the dust before his feet. And yet through every act of deliverance, Christ's power carried no violence. He did not shout his victories nor parade his authority. His triumph was quiet, born of compassion, the holy inverse of the pride that birthed the rebellion. His gentleness was the weapon none of the fallen had foreseen. The same humility that once brought him to Bethlehem now unmade the arrogance of the ages. The people marveled. With authority he commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him. But Christ did not bask in their awe. He knew that these victories were but preludes, signs of a greater battle yet to come. Each demon cast out was a note in the growing harmony of redemption, a melody that would crescendo not in triumphal procession, but in sacrifice. In the unseen realm, the ancient powers began to converge. The Prince of Darkness, the old serpent who had watched this war from its beginning, now moved among his legions. The exorcisms had revealed too much. His dominion was slipping. The more Christ healed, the closer he came to the heart of rebellion itself. The enemy understood that to stop him, the war would have to leave the shadows and spill once more into the open world. But for now, the light advanced unhindered. The earth, once filled with the cries of the possessed, began to echo with peace. The same word that silenced the storm now silenced the spirits. The Creator was walking among his creation, and wherever his feet touched, the curse of the ancient world retreated. Each deliverance was a prophecy in motion. The unclean would fall, the pure would reign, and the rebellion of the watchers would end, not by sword or flood, but by the authority of the Lamb. The war, once hidden in flesh and shadow, now moved toward its final field, not on plains or mountains, but upon a hill called Golgotha, where heaven would meet hell in a battle fought through a cross. It was the 6th hour when the sky began to darken. The sun withdrew its light as if creation itself could not bear to look upon what was unfolding. The wind grew still, the ground held its breath, and all heaven leaned close to the hill called Golgotha. There, upon a wooden cross, the story of rebellion and redemption met in a single, blinding collision. The Word made flesh, the one through whom all worlds were spoken, now hung between earth and sky, suspended between life and death, between justice and mercy. It was no ordinary execution. It was the final battlefield of the cosmos. The ancient curse that began in Eden, that grew through the sin of the watchers, that spread through empires and idols, now converged upon this one moment. All the violence of the ages, all the corruption that filled the world before the flood, all the defiance of Babylon and the pride of fallen kings, every thread of rebellion was being drawn into his suffering. The powers of darkness gathered unseen. The spirits of the giants, the old lords of corruption, the demonic hosts born of their ruin, all circled the cross in silence. For ages they had ruled through fear, through death, through despair. But now they faced something they could not comprehend, a God who conquered not by might, but by surrender. The humility they despised had become the weapon of their undoing. As nails pierced his hands and feet, the heavens trembled. The blood that fell upon the earth was not only for man, it was for creation itself, a cleansing greater than the flood. The first rain had drowned the world to wash away corruption. This blood now sanctified it from within. Each drop was a declaration that what had been lost to rebellion would be redeemed by love. From the cross he looked down upon the world that had crucified him, Roman soldiers hardened by command, priests blinded by pride, and the multitudes who had once shouted Hosanna now crying Crucify. Yet his gaze held no condemnation, only compassion. "Father, forgive them," he whispered, "for they know not what they do." Those words were not merely mercy, they were warfare. Every syllable broke chains forged since the dawn of time. Forgiveness was the blade that pierced the heart of the abyss. Then came the darkness. From the 6th hour to the 9th, the light failed completely. It was as though the flood had returned, not of water this time, but of shadow. The sun veiled its face, the air thickened with divine sorrow, and the ground began to quake. The veil of the temple, woven with symbols of heaven's order, tore from top to bottom. The barrier between the divine and the human, between heaven and earth, was gone. The gate once closed by cherubim's flaming sword now opened through a wound in the body of God. In that instant, the unseen realm convulsed. Thrones shook, dominions cracked, and the rulers of darkness realized their dominion was over. Every curse uttered in the name of rebellion, every chain that bound the soul of man was broken beneath the weight of divine surrender. "It is finished," he cried, not in defeat but in triumph. Those 3 words echoed through every corner of creation, rolling through eternity like thunder. It was the judgment pronounced over every rebellion, from Lucifer's first, "I will ascend," to the final whisper of pride in the heart of man. The angels who watched from beyond the veil bowed low, their light dimmed in reverent awe. For what they beheld was something they had never known, even in the glory of heaven. Love made perfect through suffering. The Creator had descended into his creation's pain, not to destroy it, but to heal it from within. The spear that pierced his side released blood and water, the twin symbols of cleansing and covenant, the divine echo of the flood and the promise that followed it. As he breathed his last, the earth shuddered. Rocks split, tombs opened, and the veil between worlds thinned. The dead stirred, for even Sheol could not remain silent. The abyss that had once held the watchers in chains felt the tremor of approaching light. The one who hung upon the cross was descending into their domain, not as prisoner but as conqueror. The sky began to clear. The storm receded. The cross stood alone against the horizon, a monument to victory disguised as defeat. Around it, silence returned, but it was a different silence than before, not the silence of despair but of completion. Creation itself seemed to exhale as though freed from the grip of millennia. The rebellion was crushed. The serpent's head was broken. Yet the war was not over, for though the powers of heaven had triumphed, the battlefield of the heart remained. The cross had reclaimed creation, but each soul would now choose whether to live under its light or return to the shadow. As evening fell, the body of the Son of God was laid in a tomb cut from stone. The stone that sealed it was heavy, but heavier still was the stillness of the waiting world. For heaven was not yet done. Death itself was about to be unmade. The rebellion is crushed, the curse undone. But the war is not yet over, for though the cross has silenced the abyss, its echo still stirs in human hearts until the day of final restoration. Before dawn broke on the 3rd day, the world was still wrapped in silence, the kind that rests between heartbeats, the kind that carries the weight of eternity. The tomb stood cold and sealed, guarded by soldiers who knew nothing of the battle being waged beyond their sight. The earth seemed to hold its breath. Heaven watched. The abyss trembled. For in that hollow of stone, death itself waited to be undone. Then, in the quietest moment of creation's long history, the impossible happened. The pulse of divine life stirred within the stillness of the grave. The breath that once spoke galaxies into being filled lungs again. Light that no darkness could contain broke through the walls of mortality, and the Son of God rose. No angel rolled away the stone to release him. It was rolled away so the world could see that he was already gone. The resurrection was not merely victory over death. It was the renewal of cosmic order. The same power that once flooded the world to wash away corruption now surged through the veins of creation again, not as judgment but as restoration. Where the flood cleansed the surface of the earth, the resurrection cleansed its soul. The waters of destruction had receded. Now, life itself had returned, rising with the dawn. The tomb stood empty, the ultimate silence of rebellion. Every empire, every demon, every claim of darkness was answered by that hollow space. The stone rolled away was more than a sign. It was a door opening between heaven and earth, declaring that separation no longer ruled. What the first Adam lost, the second Adam restored. The curse was broken, not by power seized, but by life freely given. 2 angels descended, radiant as the morning, and stood where his body had lain. To the women who came to mourn, they spoke words that would echo through eternity. "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Heaven had proclaimed its verdict. The war was decided. The kingdom of death had been breached, and its gates could never again be closed. In the unseen realms, the shock was total. The spirits of the giants, the ancient unclean that had ruled the underworld, felt the tremor of defeat ripple through their chains. The darkness that once seemed endless now flickered and broke. The Lord of glory had entered their domain, and the keys of death no longer belonged to them. The gates of Sheol had become the threshold of his triumph. Heaven erupted in quiet joy, not in clamor or noise, but in the deep, radiant peace of completion. The archangels bowed low, their faces lit with the reflection of the risen sun. The song that began before time now found its final verse. What the watchers had defiled, what the Nephilim had corrupted, what the empires of man had enslaved, all was reclaimed. The image of God, once fractured, now gleamed again in humanity through Christ. He walked from the tomb not as a ghost or a spirit, but as flesh glorified. The same hands that once touched lepers, that once lifted the broken, now bore the scars of victory. Those scars were not marks of defeat, but of love eternal, the proof that God had entered the wound of creation and healed it from within. Every step he took upon the grass of the garden was a declaration that death was not the end, but the beginning of renewal. When he appeared to Mary, her tears turned to worship. When he walked with his disciples on the road, the scriptures came alive like fire in their hearts. When he entered the locked room and breathed peace upon them, the very air seemed to change, creation inhaling grace for the first time. The same Spirit that once hovered over the waters at creation now filled the lungs of redeemed humanity. The resurrection was the dawn of a new creation, the first light of eternity breaking into time. Every seed that falls into the ground and rises again, every sunrise after night, every heart that dares to hope, all of it carries the echo of that morning. The universe itself was singing again, its rhythm restored to harmony with its maker. In the quiet glory of the risen Christ, the angels saw not only victory but transformation. The war that had once been fought in heaven and on earth had now moved into the heart of man. The rebellion of the watchers was silenced, but its residue remained, in pride, in hatred, in despair. Yet now a greater power dwelled within humanity, the living Christ, the Spirit of restoration. Through him, the battlefield of the cosmos became the sanctuary of the soul. The stone that once sealed the grave had become an altar. The cross that once symbolized defeat had become the throne of victory. And the empty tomb stood forever as the sign that no darkness, however ancient, could withstand the dawn of divine life. Now begins the restoration of hearts. The war no longer waged with swords or storms, but within the Spirit, where the light of the risen Christ will conquer what remains of the shadow. When the risen Christ ascended into the heavens, the earth did not fall silent, it began to awaken. The promise he had given to his disciples, "You shall receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon," the heartbeat of a new creation. In that upper room in Jerusalem where fear had locked the doors, the sound of heaven returned. A wind, unseen yet overwhelming, rushed through the house like the breath that once gave life to Adam. Tongues of flame descended, resting upon each one, and the word of God was spoken again, not through angels, but through humanity filled with divine fire. Pentecost was more than a miracle, it was a reversal. Where Babel once scattered language in judgment, Pentecost unified it in grace. The confusion that had divided nations since Babylon was undone by the voice of the Spirit. In that moment, the church became the new ark, carrying within it the covenant presence of God, not through wood and pitch, but through hearts purified by love. As the flood had cleansed the earth, the Spirit now cleansed the soul, and from this second beginning, salvation began to flow outward across the world. The apostles went forth into lands still shadowed by ancient powers. Rome, Greece, Egypt, and the far reaches of the East all bore traces of the old rebellion. Temples to false gods stood tall, oracles still whispered, and rituals of the fallen watchers survived beneath the veneer of culture and empire. Yet wherever they went, light met darkness, and the darkness fled. Demons that once claimed dominion over nations screamed as fishermen and tax collectors spoke the name of Jesus. The same authority that had silenced storms and cast out spirits now moved through ordinary men and women, transforming them into living instruments of the kingdom. Peter's shadow healed the sick. Paul's words silenced sorcerers and shook the foundations of idolatry. The church confronted not just human evil but spiritual deception, the same lies that had once birthed the Nephilim and inspired Babylon. Yet this time, heaven's strategy was different. There were no floods, no swords, no fire from the sky. The war was being won by truth, by mercy, by forgiveness. The meek now carried the authority of the Almighty. The church was no longer a witness to judgment. It was the vessel of redemption. Each gathering of believers became a fortress of light. In homes and catacombs, in fields and marketplaces, they broke bread and remembered the one who had triumphed over death. They spoke with quiet courage, proclaiming that the rebellion had been defeated, though its echoes still haunted the earth. In their love for one another, the invisible powers saw their final defeat written across the hearts of the faithful. For this was the mystery long hidden from the foundations of the world, that the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead would dwell in those who believed. Humanity, once enslaved by the corruption of the fallen, was now filled with the presence of God Himself. The image that the Nephilim had desecrated was restored. The authority that Adam had lost was given back through grace. The church became the living continuation of the incarnation, the body of Christ on earth, bearing the same power, the same compassion, the same unshakable love. Yet the apostles knew that the war had not ended. The battlefield had changed. The enemy that once built empires and raised idols now whispered within human hearts. Every act of faith became resistance, every act of love a victory. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, Paul wrote, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world. And so the armor of God was not forged of metal, but of truth, righteousness, faith, and the word. The children of light became warriors, not with violence but with virtue. Through persecution, the church grew stronger. Fire could not burn its message, chains could not bind its witness, and death could not silence its song. In the arenas of Rome, believers sang hymns as beasts were loosed upon them. Their courage was the mirror of heaven's strength, the quiet triumph of souls unafraid. Each martyr's blood became a seed, and from those seeds grew generations of faith that would spread across the world. The same angels who once wept at the corruption of mankind now rejoiced, for they saw the great reversal unfolding. Humanity, once the cause of heaven's grief, had become its glory. The war that had begun in rebellion was being finished in restoration. Every prayer whispered in faith became a strike against the darkness. Every heart surrendered to grace became a victory in the cosmic battle. The church, radiant yet fragile, became the vessel through which heaven touched the earth. Its light flickered across centuries of shadow, guiding empires, healing nations, and bearing witness that the same God who judged by flood now saves by spirit. Each believer, no matter how small or broken, carried the eternal flame that once descended in tongues of fire, the flame that would never again be extinguished. And so, the war continues, not on fields or mountains, but within the heart of every soul that must choose between pride and surrender, between the old rebellion and the new creation. The church stands as the guardian of that choice, the living ark of the covenant, sailing still upon the floodwaters of history. But though the light endures and the kingdom advances, the ancient rebellion has not vanished. It still whispers in the world's empires and hearts, awaiting its final defeat when the king himself returns to judge and restore all things. The story of humanity moves toward its final turning. The prophets saw it, and Christ himself foretold it. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. The pattern of rebellion that began before the flood will complete its circle. Once again, the world will rise in brilliance and knowledge, yet beneath its gleaming towers, the same pride that felled the watchers will stir. The end will not come through chaos alone, but through the perfection of defiance, a civilization so advanced that it believes it no longer needs God. The earth will glitter with achievement. Men will stretch their dominion beyond the boundaries of the sky, building kingdoms of metal and light. The language of ancient rebellion will return in a new form, science without reverence, wisdom without humility. Knowledge will multiply, and with it, arrogance. The sons of Adam will once more attempt to transcend the limitations of flesh, seeking immortality through artifice and machine, through the blending of what should never be joined. The old dream of the Nephilim, to become gods without God, will awaken in laboratories instead of temples. Across the nations, unity will rise again, not in faith but in ambition. The Tower of Babel will be rebuilt in spirit, not in stone. Humanity will craft systems so vast and intricate that they mirror omniscience. Their networks will bind nations together like the web of a single mind. Yet behind the progress, something ancient will whisper, the same voice that once told Eve, "You shall be as gods." The rebellion will wear a crown of technology and call itself enlightenment. The Book of Revelation unveils the final form of this delusion. Out of the sea of nations rises a beast, part human, part beyond. Its power is not its own, but drawn from the abyss where the old spirits wait. It wears the wisdom of the serpent and the might of empire. Its mouth speaks great things and blasphemies. Around it, humanity gathers in worship, not by coercion but by admiration, marveling at what their own hands have built. In that age, the ancient demonic kings, the spiritual descendants of the Nephilim, will rise once more, not in flesh, but in influence, wearing crowns of data, wealth, and deceit. It will be the age of the ultimate illusion, peace built on control, knowledge built on corruption, freedom that leads to slavery. As in the days before the flood, the earth will be filled with violence, not always the blood of war, but the quiet violence of souls severed from truth. The war that began between heaven and the fallen will reach its visible climax. The world, dazzling and defiant, will stand at the height of its self-deification and at the brink of its undoing. But even in that darkness, light will not be absent. The faithful will endure, not through armies or might, but through steadfast love. As Noah built his ark amid mockery, so too will the remnant build their lives upon faith, untouched by the rising tides of deception. The Spirit will whisper to those who listen, guiding them through the storm of the end as he once guided the ark across the flood. Then at the appointed hour the heavens will open once more. The final rebellion will meet the final revelation. The King will return, not as the silent child of Bethlehem, but as the Lord of glory, clothed in light, his eyes like fire, his voice like many waters. The armies of heaven will follow him, not to destroy creation, but to reclaim it entirely. Every throne, every power, every remnant of the ancient defiance will bow before him. The beast will fall, the false prophet will vanish, and the dragon, the old serpent of Eden, will be cast down forever. The trumpet will sound, and the dead in Christ will rise. The sea that once swallowed the Nephilim will yield up its dead, and the graves of the faithful will open to eternal dawn. In that moment, time itself will end its long labor of pain. The war that began before history will conclude in perfect harmony. Heaven and earth, once torn apart by rebellion, will be joined again as they were meant to be, the dwelling of God with man restored. The final judgment will not be chaos but clarity. Every hidden thing will be revealed. Every false glory will fade. Those who sought to become gods without him will face the truth they denied, that all power, all life, all wisdom flows from one source alone. And those who clung to faith, who carried the light through the shadowed centuries, will see what even angels long to behold, the face of God unveiled, shining brighter than the first dawn. Then the old prophecies will find their rest. The seed promised in Eden will have crushed the serpent's head completely. The blood that once cleansed will now crown the redeemed. No more giants, no more rebellion, no more night. Only the song of creation restored, echoing through the infinite expanse of a universe made new. And then stillness. The final dawn approaches, when heaven and earth will breathe as one, and all the wars of God and man will give way to eternal peace. And then came the stillness, the quiet that follows the final thunder when every sound of rebellion has faded, and the universe itself stands in reverent pause before its maker. The heavens, once shaken by war, are now filled with light so pure that even eternity seems to bow. The great story of creation has reached its last chapter. What began with a word, "Let there be light," now ends in glory too radiant for words. The veil between the seen and unseen is lifted. The dead rise, not as shadows, but as souls awakened into incorruptible life. The sea yields its sleepers, the dust of the earth stirs with remembrance, and from every age, every land, humanity stands before the throne. The angels gather in endless ranks, their radiance no longer dimmed by sorrow. The seraphim who once covered their faces in grief now sing again with unrestrained joy. And upon the throne of uncreated light sits the Lamb, once slain, now reigning, whose eyes hold the memory of every tear ever shed. Before him is the great white throne, brighter than creation's first morning. The books are opened, and time itself gives its testimony. Every act of cruelty, every whisper of deceit, every unrepented pride that once echoed the sin of the watchers is laid bare. Justice, long delayed by mercy, now speaks in perfect balance. The fallen angels, those ancient custodians who abandoned their posts, stand silent. Their sons, the unclean spirits who haunted the earth since the flood, are summoned from the depths they once ruled. No cry is heard from them. The voice of rebellion has at last lost its strength. And then the words long promised resound through creation like the roll of thunder made gentle. "Behold, I make all things new." The fire that proceeds from the throne is not destruction but purification. It sweeps through galaxies and ages alike, burning away corruption, transmuting everything it touches into light. The heavens are remade, not as a different world, but as this one restored, cleansed of decay, freed from death. Mountains rise unscarred by violence. Seas shimmer with peace. The very air sings, alive with the rhythm of divine breath. Evil, once so vast and terrible, is silenced forever. The dragon, the deceiver of nations, is cast into the lake of unending separation. The ancient spirits that once whispered in darkness vanish like smoke before dawn. There will be no more temptation, no more defiance, no more fear. The memory of sin itself fades like a dream upon waking, for the light of God leaves no shadow behind. And humanity, long fractured by pride and pain, is restored, not as mere survivors but as family. Every nation, every tongue, every soul redeemed by the blood of the Lamb gathers in unity that no empire could ever achieve. The rift between heaven and earth, between angels and mankind, is healed. The divine family stands complete, the sons and daughters of dust now shining like the stars that once watched over them. The New Jerusalem descends, radiant as a bride adorned for her beloved. Its streets gleam like glass, not because of wealth, but because nothing within it is hidden. Its gates never close, for night no longer exists. From the throne flows a river of living water, clear as crystal, winding through the heart of the city. On either side grows the tree of life, its branches heavy with fruit for every season, its leaves a healing for all that ever was wounded. And God himself dwells among his creation once more. No temple stands, for he is the temple. No sun rises, for his presence is the light. The voice that once thundered from Sinai now speaks with the gentleness of a father to his children. You are mine, and I am yours forever. The angels rejoice, not in triumph, but in peace. The long watch is over. The faithful who endured the ages are clothed in glory, their faces reflecting the one they worship. The martyrs who bore the flame through darkness now stand in everlasting dawn. The prophets, the apostles, the humble unknown, all are gathered in one unbroken chorus. And the song they sing is the first song ever written, the one creation began and rebellion silenced. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. There is no more sorrow. The last tear has fallen, caught in the palm of the eternal. Death itself, that final enemy, is unmade. Time ceases to wound, eternity ceases to wait. The Lamb reigns, and the world, his world, rests in perfect harmony. The great war that began before history is ended not in conquest, but in communion. The sons of heaven and the children of earth, once separated by sin, now share one light, one love, one life. The story that began with rebellion closes with reunion. And in that holy silence after the final Amen, creation breathes again, whole, holy, and home. From war to worship, from shadow to everlasting light, the story now rests in eternal peace, where all things are made new and God is all in all. At last the universe is quiet. The long echo of rebellion has faded into memory, and the music of creation, silenced since Eden, begins to play again. Not with instruments of man, nor with thunder or flame, but with the soft pulse of existence itself returning to harmony. Every star hums its note of praise. Every breeze carries the breath of peace. The war is over. The King has returned. The story has found its rest. The heavens shine not with power, but with gentleness. The light of God no longer blinds, it comforts. His glory is no longer distant, it dwells within everything that lives. The seas are calm, reflecting the radiance of eternity. The mountains stand unmoved, crowned in light that never fades. Creation itself seems to sigh, as though it has been waiting since the beginning for this one moment. The stillness after the storm, the Sabbath that has no end. In the city of the redeemed there is no temple, for the presence of God fills every space. The streets gleam not with gold, but with memory, each step echoing the journey that brought the faithful here, from the gardens of innocence, through the floods of judgment, the fires of trial, and the grace of redemption. Every tear once shed has become a jewel upon the robes of the saved. Every sorrow that once broke the heart now glows as proof that even pain was not wasted. The giants' war, the rebellion of angels, the rise and fall of empires, all these are now distant whispers, stories remembered not in fear, but as gentle reminders of what love has overcome. The ancient scars of creation have been healed, and though eternity remembers them, it no longer aches from their wound. The Nephilim, the Watchers, the serpents of pride, all that once defied the Creator is gone, like smoke carried away by morning light. Only peace remains, pure, undivided, eternal. Humanity, once frail and fearful, now walks unafraid in the light of God. There are no more veils, no more distances between the divine and the mortal. The redeemed are not servants, but sons and daughters, those who share in the very life of their Father. The same Spirit that hovered over the waters now fills every heart, binding heaven and earth into one unbroken communion. Every voice joins the great chorus, from the smallest child to the highest seraph, and together they sing the same truth. Holy is the Lord, whose mercy endures forever. Time has become eternity's song. There are no more beginnings, no more endings, only the rhythm of divine rest. The stars no longer rise or set, they simply shine. The river of life flows endlessly through the gardens of the new earth, its waters clear as glass, its sound like the laughter of God. The tree of life stretches its branches across the ages, its fruit sweet with remembrance, its leaves evergreen with healing. The redeemed gather beneath it in unbroken fellowship, their faces radiant with peace that can never fade. In this eternal calm, even the memory of fear dissolves. The beasts that once roamed in rebellion are now symbols of beauty. The elements that once raged now sing in harmony. The lion lies beside the lamb, not as enemies reconciled, but as companions of creation's renewed order. The very fabric of existence breathes with the heartbeat of its maker. Every atom, every soul, every sound moves in rhythm with his love. There are no more prayers of desperation, only songs of gratitude. No more altars of sacrifice, only communion. The longing that once defined human life, the ache for meaning, the hunger for belonging is gone, because the presence that once seemed far away now fills all things. Every question finds its answer in his gaze. Every exile has come home. And so the redeemed rest, not in idleness but in joy. Their rest is creation's true motion, to be forever in the light, forever in love, forever in awe. The great Sabbath has begun and it will never cease. Work and worship have become the same act. Existence itself is praise. The heavens, which once witnessed the fall of angels and the rise of giants, now resound with only one sound, peace. The vast expanse of creation hums with a single, endless note, the sound of God dwelling with his people. The angels who once guarded paradise now walk freely among the redeemed, their wings folded in reverence, their eyes reflecting the glory they serve. There is no higher or lower, no division of realm or rank, only communion, harmony, and light. And in the midst of this eternal calm stands the Lamb. His wounds still shine, not as reminders of pain, but as stars of victory. From him flows the song that sustains all things, the melody of love fulfilled. Around him, all creation gathers in stillness, listening to the music that has no end. The cosmos breathes as one. The wars of heaven, the sins of earth, the sorrow of history, all have dissolved into peace that surpasses understanding. This is the final word, the last chapter, the eternal now where time rests in the hands of its creator. And in the holy silence that follows, creation whispers its last prayer, soft as a sigh, eternal as love. Glory to the Lamb forever. All is finished. All is well.